Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ann Paheeler, your facilitator for today. We're ready to begin our webinar. I am excited about what we're talking about today. The webinar is entitled Using Prior Learning Assessments for Recruitment and Retention of Special Adult Populations, and we have some very good speakers to share their knowledge with us. Next slide, please. These webinars are brought to you by the CCTA, the Centers Collaborative for Technical Assistance, and for this webinar you will actually be in listen-only mode using your computer or your phone for your audio. Please do look to the right-hand side. You will see there is a question window. You can type in your questions there. The questions will be offered to the speakers when we have time for them, probably not until the end of the presentation. Also, the webinar is being recorded and you will be sent a link to that recording. Next slide. The CCTA is led by 5 National Science Foundation ATE centers. National Center for Convergence Technology, which is basically IT and communications, is my center. We're the lead. South Carolina ATE Resource Center, that we have a speaker from that group, Rick Roberts. He will actually be our host for today, other than my facilitating. Then we've got the Florida ATE Center, BioLink ATE Center in San Francisco, and then the Networks Resource Center in Maricopa College District in Arizona. Next slide. Why are we doing this? We were initially asked to respond to a request from the Department of Labor to have the ATE centers provide technical assistance and guidance for our DOL TACT grantee friends. Actually now we're down to almost the last round of TACT grantees, but along the way we have learned that what we are talking about is totally relevant for those who have NSF grants and also other workforce programs of all kinds, whether or not there's a grant. Our deliverables, you're experiencing one of them, our topical webinars with Q&A. We also have a set of best practices that are on our website, so when you get the information about the recording around that area, you're going to find the best practices as well, and you can download those. And we're hosting convenings. At the very end of today's presentation, we will share with you the next convening, which will be in Salt Lake City on July 21st. Next slide. Okay, let's start with a poll. In fact, we have a couple of them, I believe. It's important for us to know whether you are involved with an NSF grant, both a TACT grant, both or neither. So let's take a few seconds for you to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to close the poll after 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, please. Okay, so today we have 11% National Science Foundation grantees, 43% TACT grantees, 5% that have both, and a lot who have neither. Well, that does not surprise me because prior learning assessment is a very big topic these days. Thank you. Next slide. Our second poll, it's important for us from an evaluative standpoint to know how many people we're reaching. So could you at this point indicate whether there are no people listening with you or 1, 2, 3 or more listening with you to this webinar? And I'll close this in a few moments. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so most of you are alone, although some have at least one additional person, or actually one additional person listening with them. Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to introduce Rick Roberts officially. He is the lead presenter for today, and he is the Assistant Director for the South Carolina ATE Center. Rick, I would ask you please to introduce Sarita Acker and Donald McCoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here this afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. We have with us today Sarita Acker. Sarita Acker is the Executive Director of the Programs for Educational Enrichment and Retention and Women in Science and Engineering at Clemson University. Under Sarita's leadership, WISE has expanded to include outreach programs for females from kindergarten through 12th grade, as well as current undergraduate female students. She has served as a diversity trainer for Clemson University for many years and has served as a mentor for the Mentor Leagues program through the American Association of Community Colleges. Sarita holds a master's degree from Clemson University in Human Resource and Development and then her bachelor's degree from Lander University. And Sarita, can you just take a few minutes?
Yes, I'm very delighted to be here today on the behalf of Clemson University to talk to you about mentoring and outreach and recruitment. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have with us Donald McCoy. Donald is retired from the IBM Corporation with 30 years of service with experiences as a senior engineer and responsibilities in people, process, projects, and program management. His career includes product development, manufacturing product test development, consulting technical services, and marketing. His last decade at IBM was spent focused on K-to-college initiatives and outreach programs designed to attract, develop, and retain representation of diverse technical talent and in the workforce readiness programs. Donald earned his BS in electrical engineering technology from Old Dominion University and also holds an AAS degree in electronics technology from the College of Albemarle Community College in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Donald?
Thanks, Rick. I look forward to sharing my industry insights and perspectives with the team today.
Okay, next slide. Thanks again for joining us today. I will begin today with talking to you about a little bit about PLA, or Prior Learning Assessment, what it means, and the following types of prior learning experience that you may want to consider as we all struggle with that age-old question and issue of recruitment and retention of special populations and adult students. Prior Learning Assessment, or PLA, is an important and often overlooked strategy for helping students progress towards a degree. PLA is the process by which many colleges evaluate for academic credit for college-level knowledge and skills an individual has gained outside the classroom or from non-college instructional programs, including employment, military training, travel, hobbies, sometimes civic activities, and volunteer service. PLA recognizes and legitimizes that often significant learning. Many students return to the college campus with years of experience through their work, professional and military training, self-study, hobbies and community activities, as well as various tests such as Dante's, which we'll cover in a little bit, CLEP and proficiency exams, advanced placement and certificate programs resulting in learning that occurs outside the classroom. Such learning occurs on many levels, and we'll see what those are as we move forward, and some of you have probably experienced those. To receive credit for the learning occurring outside the classroom, though, the student must substantiate that knowledge, and it is college level. Two or three things we want to cover to start is basically credit for life experience, and how it works is you evaluate the college level knowledge and skills an individual has and it's gained outside the classroom and apply that to college credit, including rigor and comparing that to college syllabuses. A portfolio needs to describe and present evidence of that past, and in most colleges, I know that I've been involved with in the past, you need to take at least 30 credits at that school directly related to the degree program. So the PLA would not be something that would be transferring in 45 credits or giving 45 or 60 credits for an AAS degree. Next slide. How PLA is determined. It's either going to be all 5 of these or a combination of each, and maybe some unique ways out there that I have not seen recently. Individual assessment, national and local evaluations, some standard exams that we all know and are familiar with, transfer credits, and then college credit and military experience. Next slide. To be eligible for credit, prior learning experience must include all of these things that are on the slide, or at least the biggest portion of those. They need to be equivalent to quality college level learning, be publicly verifiable through objective measurements. So you must be able to demonstrate a qualified skill and appropriate knowledge of that skill. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. College credit will not be awarded for just mere application of that. You have to have a demonstrated knowledge, either through certificate or a work product or some other things that we'll talk about here in just a bit, and has general application outside the specific situation in which you acquired the experience. Next slide. Can we go to the next slide, Janet? So national and local evaluation, everybody's familiar with the American College or Council on Education, basically assess non-collegiate instructional programs to provide credit recommendations. Another way, and what we called it in my prior life in Pennsylvania in the community college system, was students occupationally and academically ready, or SOAR. And these are basically high priority occupations as identified by your particular state. We called them SOARs in Pennsylvania, but they're through the high school career and technical education programs, and you receive skills learned towards a certificate or degree. Next slide. And again, National Credit Recommendation Service, NCCRS, most of us are familiar with that, and NOCTI. NOCTI is to evaluate non-collegiate training and education programs for college credit equivalencies. It's basically the National Occupation of Competency Testing Institute, and they deliver a battery of assessments or standardized tests for students studying career and technical programs in high schools and technical colleges within the United States. Next slide. These are all the prior learning assessments that we're probably pretty familiar with in most of our institutions if you're calling from a community college or a university. The college level examination program, or CLEP, the advanced placement programs at the high schools, or pre-apprenticeship programs, or other standard exams, which we'll talk a little bit more, in DSST, which is Dante's for the military, and ACT-PEP. We all take a look at those. And we use them pretty often on a regular basis, but we're going to talk a few of those around those and some of the things outside of those particular standard exams. So next slide. This was big, the credit for military experience and recruiting veterans and those serving in the military from the conflicts that began in the early 2000s to now. The recruitment, and there are a lot of veterans that are coming back and need services. The American Council of Education collaborates with the U.S. Department of Defense, and they've come up with an ACE military guide, and it's been around for a long time, even prior to those conflicts, but basically gives credit recommendations to colleges and universities for military experience. And the DSST is one of those testing pieces that help with that. Next slide. The portfolio evaluation, which is really pretty standard when you're talking about prior learning assessment. Now, what is in that portfolio and what's required may change from place to place, university and college. But basically, the portfolio is a prospective students build for review and should include testing results, job descriptions, additional licenses or certificates, descriptions of training courses completed, awards and citations showing any use of your KSAs, examples projects that you participated in or completed, a work project or product, letters of verification or recommendations, some published materials if that's applicable, and any site links that document the student's work. So the most PLA assessors on the faculty or on the campuses are usually faculty or deans, and they're actually looking for most of that information. Next slide. There are a couple of different approaches to implementing PLA. The individual college approach, which is happening quite a bit across the country. It's the individual college determines whether to participate in PLA or have a limited participation. This is a start, but it can be very disjointed and subjective in nature. As described in my prior slides, there were many avenues to measuring PLA and ways to give them credit. This can be confusing, though, for the student if it's not consistent across those particular avenues. So we try to navigate, as the student tries to navigate admissions and registration, it becomes a little confusing about what may or may not be transferring particular states and institutions. I like the coordinated system approach through, though it's much more difficult to bring about. There are several states out there that are moving forward and have implemented, including Tennessee, Ohio, Washington, Pennsylvania, where I came from, and Texas. The coordinated system approach, or basically the system-wide task force approach, is basically where you're bringing teams together from across the state and from individual systems and trying to implement any specific project-based activities. Each institution should engage in a number of planning meetings among system and institutional representatives. These activities help the colleges communicate its reasons for wanting to advance PLA, and they provide opportunities for collaboratively identifying appropriate strategies within the context of what the colleges are already doing. These joint planning sessions should continue pretty regularly even after the implementation process has been started. A PLA task force might want to be something that you would think about, hosted statewide, or PLA summit attendees and representatives from institutions basically from across the state. Participants may include, chancellors and presidents, but for the most part, deans, registrars, advisors, admissions, and faculty. The summit could include maybe an overview of PLA, a session featuring leaders from your state and region within the state who discuss efforts to expand PLA in their institutions to help with recruiting and retention in their particular states. There's also ways internally within the system to do that, such as peer-to-peer awareness programs and approaches. This could be lunch and learns, mentoring between college personnel. You always need internal champions, which will ultimately be the most effective way of carrying out any kind of implementation or moving this forward. The most important aspect I do want to get across as you delve into starting down the PLA path is identifying consistent PLA policies and practices as a major goal of your project. And then I'm going to refer you to a particular reference link at the bottom of the page, which is the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. If you want to take a look at that review and that study, it reviewed 3 state PLA models, and it does identify some great lessons learned and some implementation ideas that were given in those 3 particular states, some hurdles that were there and some landmines to look out for, but for the most part, some very good practices as you're looking to implement this. So with that, thank you again for joining us today, and I'm going to turn this portion of the presentation over to Ms. Sarita Acker.
Yes. I'd like to start to tell you a little bit. Next slide, please.
So Rita, you might want to get a little bit closer to the phone.
Okay. Again, I'm Sarita Acker. I'm at Clemson University. Next slide. Here I direct 2 of the oldest diversity programs to try to increase the number of underrepresented students in STEM. We use the acronyms of PEER and WISE for our program, so I will refer to them through my presentation as PEER and WISE. Next slide. Clemson is currently ranked in top 23 in the public universities. Our students love their college experiences. As you can see, we're 3rd in the nation, and as far as our retention rates, they're around 91%. Next slide. We have a more traditional approach to our admissions process. When we look at the PLA process, we do use some subject matter examinations as we accept students, but mainly it's mostly, as you can see here, AB, IB credit, math placement, SAT, GPA, and so on and so forth. Thank you. Next slide. One of the things that I will be focusing on today is talking to you about knowing your students, the special populations that you're trying to recruit and retain. And so as I begin to put together a presentation, I think this is the first place that we need to stop and just consider that we need to know a lot about our populations. And so as I've been working with underrepresented populations, I found out that some of these things that I have listed here are some of the things that we need to consider when we're trying to retain them and recruit them. Financial barriers are number one when you talk about special populations. So I think it's very important that students need to know all the different financial aids and scholarship opportunities that are out there for them. And a lot of times when we're dealing with the adult populations, they're trying to work and balance their work and their school all together. I think that when you're building programs, you need to look at devising programs that would consider accelerated programs, opportunities for stackable credentials, distant learnings, and programs as well. I tell a story every time I get to do a presentation about a young lady who had enrolled in a traditional university, but she was not able to stay, but she saw an ad in the paper at one of the local newspapers, and she took some, she took some training, some stackable credentials, and she was later able to land a job at Michelin working in their tire company, and it turned in their lab, and it changed her whole life. So just knowing that you have to let everyone know about the different opportunities is very big. Also, I want to talk about, being the first generation. Sometimes even though we have students, I know the populations that I deal with, a lot of times they're first generation. So being the first, and then if you add in maybe an older student not knowing really how to maneuver the system and maybe thinking, you know what, it's been a long time since I've been in school. Also, social acceptance is very important as you think about planning and building your programs, because it's important for them to see other role models, other people that have come through and been through where they're trying to go. And then finally, just awareness of navigating the campus and being aware of the resources, things like child care, job placement, and all of that is very important. Next slide. I want to talk to you about some of the tools that I use and I feel that are best practices when it comes to dealing with underrepresented populations. One of the things that we use here is called proactive mentoring. And if you look at most industries, they always assign a person a mentor when they, take a job. And so what we have done is just kind of create this proactive mentoring model where before a student even gets to campus, we proactively give them a mentor, and it's usually someone that is an upperclassman or is someone that's in, the going where they're trying to go. And this person becomes an instant friend or peer, and they can provide information and advice and support, and also help them form study groups and give them those unknown, answers that they have about just being in the major or getting that credential, and also point them to resources and opportunities. A lot of times mentors can be found sometimes when advisors and faculty are not always available. We do pay our mentors here so that they can, feel like they're having some kind of something given back to them. One of the things that we do with the mentors that we have here at Clemson is that we tell them what to tell their mentees, so they go through a training program. So mentoring is very key, I feel, when you're trying to build a program. Also, another one of the tools that we use here is the bridge programs. I feel like even if it's just a developmental bridge program, hosting something to give them a jump start or a head start, before they actually come to campus and begin to take the class. It's kind of like a preview. This has worked very well with younger students, and I feel like it should be replicated with older students. It also gives them an opportunity to build on their skills, show them campus, allow them to take a class, let them meet other students like them, and point them to resources as well. Next slide. One of the things that we're big on here is also providing tutoring, and I know most community colleges and colleges have a tutoring center, but having a dedicated space where they can know that they can get help with anything that they're kind of, not feeling confident in. And so here we have, we offer test help sessions. We offer also, again, a dedicated space, and we also make students aware of all the resources that are there. Sometimes it can be very intimidating coming in and just not knowing how it's going to be when it's been a while since you've been in school. Next slide. I want to just stop here and talk about some ways to recruit underrepresented or populations. I think that we can look at undeclared majors on our campuses. A lot of times the students that are undeclared on our campus are a good way to build our program as well, maybe doing some workshops in front of them to let them know what we have to offer and what credentials they can get to even add to if they decide to go in another major. Again, just letting them know about the stackable credentials, advertising them, as I told you my story about the young lady that, went back to school and it changed her whole life. Also offering online classes. A lot of times when you're working adults, you don't have the time to, maybe come in and be on campus, but just letting them know about the online classes, just hosting workshops with, in industries and having a partnership with them. Social media is really big for a lot of people, so maybe even advertising there. And then aligning the certificates with, maybe if I get a certificate and I take so many courses, I can go back and get my associates based on what I've already taken, or my bachelor's degree and so forth. And just expanding articulation agreements with other universities and so forth, so that can help as well. Finally, again, I just put working here, but when I was referring here to just working with industry to see if there's anything that you can offer to help the employees that they already have in their company. Next slide. I just put here a sample example of a recruitment agenda. a lot of times here we have recruitment days, and it's very important when you're first generation and it's been a while since you've been in the college setting to know all of these things that I've listed here. What is it going to cost me? What are all the requirements and deadlines? The opportunities to internship, the co-op? Are there can I see other students' experiences? Can I get a tour of campus? Maybe I can attend a real class to see what it's like. And then also talking about the social and racial atmosphere of your campus. And then any kind of scholarship opportunities and job opportunities. Next slide. I think it's very important for me to pause to tell you that I feel very strongly that some of these mentoring, the bridge programs have really worked for me here at Clemson. And so I want to show you that we have a recruitment program called Peer Snapshot, and about 80% of the students that have come to our recruitment days, they desire to come here and attend Clemson. So we've had a major impact just by having recruitment days. The FIRE is our bridge program, and a lot of the students, again, this is traditional students, have come in the summer and participated in our bridge program, and a lot of them go on to further their education to, get a master's degree or get a doctorate degree. So I think just giving them that extra confidence has made a difference. And then mentoring, we do pre and post surveys on our mentors and mentees, and in the mentoring category, about 70% of our mentees said that it was very helpful to have a mentor here on campus. And then again, with tutoring and study hall, that's always, very helpful to everyone. Next slide. I would like to just pause here, and this is an activity that I always encourage everyone to do, to just look at and do a SWOT analysis. Think about on your university, what are your strengths? What do you already have here on your campus now that can help you go to the next level? Think about your opportunities, your threats, things that you need as far as funding. Do you have the higher administration behind you? And I heard that Rick said earlier, just being consistent, I think that is the major thing. So I would like to encourage everyone on the call to just sit down and think about where you are and how you can build your program and be consistent. Thank you very much. I will now pass it on to Donald.
Thank you, Sarita. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now we'll cover some industry insights as it would relate to recruiting strategies. Next slide. With a technical background, nearly all of my human resources assignment have covered some form of K to college STEM pipeline readiness programs and recruiting. So that's prepared me to do a good session with you today. Next slide. So let's get into the mindset of an industry leader. You see here 3 banners that cover those. Top is that all business leaders understand that their people is their greatest human asset. That's a fact. 2, a diverse workforce and team can generate more innovation and creativity from their brainstorming and teamwork based on their diversity of thought and life experiences. These are key to any solid workforce. 3, it is a business imperative that all business leaders understand that attracting talent, developing that talent, and retaining that talent is a key initiative that's paramount in today's highly competitive environment. Next slide, please. So let's put it in perspective to those individuals that's coming to the table or to the workforce with a prior learning assessment experience. This chart will indicate that it comes from the left and from the right. Now, in industry, I didn't hear the term prior learning assessment. I heard experienced professional hires. And when a manager said they were looking at getting their workforce ready to run initially out of the gate, they looked at these key areas you have here. And many of these, actually Rick covered earlier, that an individual with a prior learning experience will bring to the table. Next slide, please. So why would an industry leader want someone with a prior learning experience. Here are 5 key reasons why they benefit the bottom line. Everything from getting a solid return on investment to increasing time to productivity for employees, right to leadership and the mature individual that would understand things about adaptability, risk-taking, their confidence level. There are many advantages that an individual with prior experiences or life experiences will bring in this case. Next slide, please. So this chart is highlighting the trends of recruiting. It should be no surprise to anyone out there that pervasive mobile technologies is driving our society today. So recruiting organizations and hiring managers understand this, so they're taking advantage of it. As you can see here, some 45% of job seekers on a daily basis use some type of mobile device to keep tabs on what job opportunities out there. And what I find even more important is over 85% of them think that using some mobile device is a critical role in job hunting and the overall job hunting process. And from the business perspective, they're using more intelligent technologies to make that happen, such as artificial intelligence that's helping both the company as well as the job seeker. A wide variety of technologies are being used. Back in the days of a recruiter sitting down to a stack of resumes, those days are over. Today you have technologies that's doing that surveying of the resumes, looking for key words and the like. Next slide, please. And you can't get away from social media. This is driving the job posting boards, driving real-time awareness of job opportunities out there, taking advantage of tools from LinkedIn to Facebook and so many other tools that's centered around a digital footprint that would have that in place, such as many of the documents that Google is using. The other thing I want to leave with you here on this chart is that over 84% of the companies out there today view that social media is a way to advertise jobs. It's key. Next slide, please. Now, this chart is a bit busy, but I want you to focus in 3 areas. Starting at the top, these are our outcomes. This is the workforce planning initiatives that all companies have. And actually, that's the area where I worked in IBM. Now, let's drop to the bottom one where we talk about the enablers. So this is where the recruiting plans and all of the management of processes and systems that's needed to drive that recruiting activity. From the top to the bottom, they drive the center 5 key areas that every company is focused on. So when they talk about capacity, understanding the supply and demand, as well as gap analysis, what skills is required to do particular product development and or service development, that's key. Obviously, cost is a component of that. Diversity and inclusion for special individuals, and that's what we're talking about today, is how do you hit those special populations. The 4th area here is location. There was a time that individuals had to go to a particular city or geographic location around the world for employment. But with remote capabilities and the cloud-based technologies, it doesn't matter where you are. But all of those lead into this 5th category here of qualifications. What are the degrees? What are the credentials and licenses and the like? And that's really where we talk about an individual leveraging their prior learned experience. So next slide, please. So here you see on the left 2 key areas, and I call these our gatekeepers. If an individual with prior learned experience cannot get past the human resources team, and you see 9 of them listed there, everyone from the HR manager to that data management staff that's running the database, that's analyzing what trends of skills are coming in and how they are being fed on to the hiring manager. If you can't get past that gate, you won't get through. The next level here, just to the right, is the hiring organization representatives. So you may get through the human resources component or those individuals or staff, but then you got to get past that hiring manager. So you will possibly have interviews with the project leaders and team members. Diversity executives are often involved, especially as with seek special populations, the talent managers, including training and staff, because many times if an individual have a certain credential, they want to be vetted and making sure that all of the demonstrated skill sets are there. And then you'll see here at the far right is just some of the recruiting methods today. As I mentioned earlier, the digital ecosystem is where all the job postings and seeking really is taking place. There's no way you can rely on a snail mail or paper environment today. It's just not possible. And the days of the job fairs and career fairs are still there. However, many times the individuals are collecting data electronically right on the spot, from scanning in resumes to taking an image and sending it back to their databases right on the spot. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is where I hope to give you some insight onto what employers look at. This is was a good survey done last year, but I don't have a lot of time to get into this, but I will just tell you that the top key areas here that you're well familiar with have not changed. Companies are looking for individuals with good leadership skills as well as those soft skills, which are key. When you talk about problem solving and critical thinking, and relevance is key across the industry, so it does not matter there. And as you see them outlined here in order of priority. Next slide.
Actually, Donald, this is Ann. You can stay on this slide a little bit if you'd like to.
Okay.
We're actually running ahead of schedule.
Oh, great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ann. So, given the opportunity to talk more in detail, so when you talk about an individual coming with these prior learned experiences, leadership qualities is really where you should focus your evidence, if you will. What jobs have you had? How have you been engaged in managing others, leading projects, and the like? Your abilities to showcase working in teams is going to be key. However, in today's global environment, just working with a team in your locale or with your project or with your particular site or company location is not good enough. To say that you have worked with companies, company representatives in other geographies around the world is much more appealing. As an example, I can think across my mind right now, one of the projects I worked on earlier had a concurrent engineering initiative going on, so that we were working with the Asian community, the European community at the same time, as well as multiple states here in the United States. So when our clock was clocking out at the end of the day in the U.S., other time zones were continuing with that same project based on using cloud computing and all that you had going on. Communication skills is key, both written and verbal. Businesses seek that. When you talk about problem solving, and I'm not talking about problem solving in a one dimension. I'm talking about when we talk about the T-based skills. So you're long and deep in your knowledge about how something would go on, not only from the technical side, but being mindful of the business component, because there are many technical solutions that are given. However, they tend to drive a lot of costs. So if you're not focusing on the costs and the return on investment, you won't pass. Okay, next slide. Okay, next one. There we go. Thank you. Sometimes it takes a moment. So this will be right along the same level. So when we talk about what skills a prior learned assessment would bring to an individual, this is in sync with what Sheree was talking about earlier. SWOT analysis is key. So when an individual will take time to really understand what their skills inventory and what their competency are, it is very important to focus on those strengths, as well as knowing your weaknesses and doing an interview, being willing to acknowledge those in a way that you're actually working on something or how you are achieving progress into making them a lesser component within your overall career or portfolio. What opportunities do you have to take risks? Because individuals with prior learning experiences, they take risks at a different level than someone who does not have that experience. So a mature risk taker would handle something different than obviously one that does not, as well as understanding the opportunities that your personal brand may bring. You may be an industry leader that's known for something that you have done really well, that's being done through a patent that others are using or the like. So leverage that as well. So when you think about your SWOT analysis, and the component that many people don't like to focus on is the threats. What are those things that are subject to derail or impede your career progress? Make sure that you understand those and focus on those clearly. It may be something that can be annoying to individuals that's keeping you from advancing. So managers are looking at those things, and in some cases, some of the psychological examinations or assessments they do, they will reveal those things in a profile that comes out on your psychological assessment that many companies still do. Next slide, please. Again, trying to prepare the individual for those job opportunities. Many recruiters today still use the STAR process of asking an individual to give them a situation in which they have handled something, giving them a clear vision of what was expected, what tasks were included towards that. And this does not necessarily mean the things that go well, but what are some of the hindrances? What are some of the things that may impede progress? It may have been an element of cost. It may have been resources for manpower or the like, and or access to technology many times. So how do you handle those in terms of developing the tasks, and what actions did you take to make it happen? And then the last one is, what were those outcomes? What were the results? And it doesn't always have to be a positive one, because there are a lot of best practices that come out of lessons learned and postmortems that come out on projects and things that in that nature. So I can't overemphasize enough that individuals with prior learned experiences, they need to make sure that they're ready to handle this interview, and not only to an HR gatekeeper, I call them, but to the hiring manager and their team members, because they're going to ask a lot of questions, well-rounded, and to showcase that that you're validating what you come into the table with. Okay, next slide. Well, earlier they talked about this being associated with the Department of Labor. Actually, I worked on the second group here, which was a project through the Department of Education and Labor that created these task force groups and resources. There's a whole host of resources out there that they put under the banner of the Community Links Education.gov. Also, from the IBM perspective, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of is taking advantage of the resources out there under SHRM, the Society of Human Resources Management, a whole host of them. Technically, that's all I have. We covered a lot of information really fast, so hopefully we have some questions that we can get a little deeper dive into.
We do indeed have questions. We have several.
Thank you.
Let's start with the first of them. Rick, what does it cost to be a part of CALE? And do you have to be a part of CALE to be certified to do prior learning assessment?
I'm not sure what the costs are to be a part of CALE. I know they do a lot of things in reference to PLA. That particular study that I talked about was with the Lumina Foundation. So I don't know the cost of that, but I don't think, the second part of your question was what and do?
Yeah, the question was, do you have to be a part of or a member of CALE to be certified to do prior
PLA.
learning assessment?
No, you do not. You do not. The prior learning assessment is based on that particular college and what your assessments are and what you want to recognize as college level. Now, they also, obviously, we talk about the standard exams and things like that that are pretty recognized throughout the country, the NOCTI and some of those that we talked about earlier, but you do not have to be a part of CALE to be PLA certified.
And also, Rick, how is prior learning assessment done for work experience at Florence Darlington Community College? That's actually where the skate center is located. Do you know who does that?
We do it through our registrar's office, and I'm glad you asked that question because I did a little research because I had to find out exactly what we were doing here at Florence Darlington when I started down this subject, because I know we were doing some things, but we actually do an assessment of prior learning, and it's through an application process, which would be similar to that resource that I gave you on the first slide that we talked through that we used in PA. It's kind of this overall application where we're asking about transfer information that you need through your tech prep, your advanced placement, or your institutional baccalaureates. Credit by formula, so we put together some formulas by the American Council on Education, your military experience, and your specialty schools, including CLEP. And then we do credit by evaluation, where obviously it's written exams and oral exams and demonstrations of that portfolio. So we do a little of everything. I wouldn't say it's overly extensive, but we use a little bit of each one of these tools that we talked about today.
Thank you. So Sarita, here's a question for you. At Clemson, how do you track which outreach, recruitment, retention approaches are most effective, or how do you judge that? And how do you determine which approaches you're going to invest in the future? And also, how do you determine what kind of a new approach you're going to try? What kind of evidence do you need before you try something new?
Well, as I said in the beginning, I think it's very important to assess the population that you're dealing with and knowing their needs, and just kind of look at that before you build any program. The way that we assess here is that we have a department, institutional research, that helps me put together learning objectives and do pre and post assessment to see what our impact is, because no one wants to just have programs, recruitment, retention, or whatever, and they're not working. I will say that I work very closely with that office to devise questions that I should ask when I have certain populations joining us here on campus. And then as far as I go, when I look at what we are going to do in the future, I always gauge what's going on with the different populations. It's always been pretty consistent: financial needs, first generation, not really knowing how to maneuver campus. And so I always include resource information in all of the outreach and recruiting efforts that I put out there. And then again, being just consistent in what you do. It takes a little time sometimes, but it certainly has paid off for us here at Clemson.
Thank you. A question for you, Donald.
Yes.
Why were entrepreneurial skills marked so low on the evaluation list of things that employers want? Because we're hearing a great deal about needing to teach entrepreneurial skills along with the technical skills.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I can only surmise that this survey was done by larger corporations, and they tend to have a different view on that entrepreneurial, how do you say, the word that come to mind would be,
maybe skill set, or?
Thank you for helping. Not so much skill set as when you, and I'll put this in context to an IBM. Yes, entrepreneurial is a strong component, but the culture says that we will handle that for you. Someone in a senior, like I was a senior engineer, we would take input from, from lower ranks, if you will, but it was synthesized in a different view, as opposed to being a small entity, having to be more agile, and that business entrepreneurial side was a critical component, where in a larger corporation, you had departments that was responsible for this entrepreneurial side. So you had a whole host of business, marketing, people that was handling those things. Well, you didn't have to worry about it in the lower ranks, if you will. So in summary, I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm thinking this survey was done by larger corporations that was not it's not that important. I can only imagine. Because if you say the same for a small or medium-sized business, it would be totally different as opposed to large enterprise corporations.
Well, and I suppose, in fact, the comment came in that perhaps we're thinking that at least the business representatives that work with my center really want the entrepreneurial mindset, whether they want them to actually go off and start their own businesses or not. They want them to be self-starters, able to, be aware of the business and that sort of thing. So maybe that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
That's so interesting because yes, we challenge the young engineers, and that's one of the reasons we need that fresh blood, and many times they are put in those environments just to handle that level of innovation, where by the time it's passed up, it's more filtered, it's more seasoned, and it comes out of a different batch, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah, that
so
one escapes me.
Sorry, I cut you off. So another question for you. Is it your sense that companies are having more and more trouble projecting their hiring needs into the future now than ever before?
That is an excellent question. Are they having more difficult? I would say they're a little more cautious with bottom line profits and things being monitored ever so closely these days. To have a workforce ready to, just in case, to produce project X, Y, Z in the future, as opposed to having someone ready to produce that product today, costs money to have an excessive quantity of workers ready to do something. And I'll put that in the real context, because doing multiple entities that I have worked with outside of IBM, and inclusive, I would say, when it was imperative that you had a certain skill set ready to do something, and they say, we need it done now. However, if they say, well, if that's not a high priority for our products and services, we don't need that skill. We'll contract that out. So the workforce didn't have to be as large. So you were able to work with a leaner workforce and do it on a contract basis as needed. I hope that makes a little sense to them. But
okay.
You just don't need it.
So I'm going to draw a question here myself, and that is, am I right that when you talk about evaluating prior learning, from an industry standpoint, it's basically what you're going to use as the basis on which to decide who you're going to employ and what you're going to pay them, while in the college environment, it's not a whole lot different. It's who you're going to give credit for prior work so that they don't have to stay there as long to get the credentials. Seems to be a comparison that I had not thought about before today.
I think that's right on time. That's the way I actually looked at this, because we call them professional experienced hires. So when you looked at what their credentials were in terms of work experiences, their leadership in a particular technology or business sector, and how they have been compared to other similar leaders with that experience level within the business, then you are able to develop a profile that will provide that individual with a suitable compensation package. And that compensation package would be equivalent to what educational value do they have, in my thinking.
Sarita, what do you think?
we have a set criteria here at Clemson for you know, getting in, but I think I do agree with you that you can draw a comparison. Even when I think about some of the things that I work with, the mentoring and so forth, as I said in my opening when I was talking about that before, mentoring is a big part of industry, so it's kind of a lot of ways you can draw comparisons, so I do agree with you.
Okay, a final question, Rick. You mentioned providing credit by formula. Is that documented somewhere at Florence Darlington, and is that shareable?
That would be documented. I can double check and see if that will be shareable with other institutions, but I don't think it's proprietary. So I think that if they're talking about the process and what we might use and how it's documented, I think I can get that information for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to the next slide, Janet. We have another webinar coming up. We're actually going to skip July, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. In the middle of August, we're going to talk about how to mine job listings to figure out an employer's needs. I know that this is one of the hot topics of discussion, that a given job may have really as many as 1,000 different titles, although the jobs are quite similar. So this will be a very relevant presentation put on by Michael Lasecki. And then September 21st, we're going to talk about how do you prepare for the future. And I don't know all the details of that, but I suspect we're going to talk about how do you prepare for the future while keeping the boat afloat today, or the work done today. And then here's our link for other upcoming webinars. This is also the link for looking at the prior recordings. All of the prior recordings are there, the slides are there, and then sometimes we'll have some supporting documentation. Next slide. This is what we're doing in July. The High Tech Conference is July 17th through the 20th, and then on the 21st, we're going to have a convening that will talk specifically about how one would develop a National Science Foundation ATE grant. Some of you will know that we had 4 webinars this spring talking about those essential elements. Dr. Celeste Carter, who is the lead for the program, was actually involved in 2 of those webinars. We also had Q&A sessions after each webinar. I highly suggest you listen to those 4 webinars, listen to the Q&A sessions, and make your notes and come up with a really, really, really good idea as to what you think you might want to write a grant about. It's very important to have an extremely good idea. National Science Foundation money cannot be used for supporting the status quo. It's always something new, or at least something new to your college. This will be an intensive session from 8:30 to 12:30. Dr. Carter will handle several of the questions that have been submitted, and then we're going to go to a panel of all of the supporting organizations that are supporting CCTA, plus we have 2 very adept evaluators, one from the Rex Company and one from Western Michigan University. And so I will facilitate a panel, and we will answer lots and lots of questions, and then we'll also take questions from the audience. Additional to that, we will have some time for you to get one-on-one consultation from Dr. Carter or some of the other experts in the area. For example, my group works very integrally in working with business in a very engaged manner so that they co-own our program. It's the BUILT model, if you've heard about that. We will be talking about that. Others will be able to talk to you about the latest, greatest idea you have in a particular discipline area to make sure that it's not that it is new, that it isn't something that's been done 4 or 5 or 6 times, etc. So it's going to be a really exciting time. Next slide. Well, okay, here's all of what I just told you. The 4 webinars are in the middle there: grants and innovation, grant proposal resources, developing stakeholder partnerships, and tips for competitive proposals. As I mentioned, the TACT program, the round 4 grants have about a year to go. Round 3 grants are ending this fall. I believe it's September 30th. So you might be interested in taking something that you didn't quite get accomplished in terms of new and taking it to NSF ATE programs. As long as it focuses on technician education, in general, it would be something that would be applicable to the ATE program. And again, you're invited to come to this convening whether or not you have registered for the entire high-tech conference, although that's very, very interesting, and we'd love to have you there too. So this concludes our presentation. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Hopefully you've learned a lot. Please stay tuned and answer the survey that will be next. We do have to justify what we're doing, and the webinar survey does help a great deal for us doing that. Thank you again. Have a pleasant afternoon. Oh, and thank you to our presenters. Our presenters have been fabulous. Rick Roberts, Sarita Acker, and Donald McCoy, thank you so much for donating your time to this webinar.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Good afternoon. This ends the webinar. Thank you.